wall clock ticks toward 222 as a thin strip of light from the hallway bulb flickers across the apartment floor, and a cold draft slides under the door. A yellow sticky note on the peephole reads, "Never answer the door at 222. Written in a hurried hand, tell me below what hour and where you were when something knocked. And if this tight little scare found you, like and subscribe so we can keep listening." She stays where the linoleum meets the shadow, knees bent like a hinge, listening to her breath double and fumble in the small room. The kettle on the stove breathes steam in slow exhalations. The metal handle is warm under her fingers. Light from the hallway thins into a pale strip, then breaks into bits as the bulb stutters. Each blink a small subtraction of safety. The sticky note feels ridiculous and real all at once. Its paper grain is dry under her thumb, and the ink has feathered at one edge, as if whoever wrote it had been shaking. Outside the door, the air tastes faintly of rain on hot concrete, a memory of someone else's weather pressing at the frame. That pressure is new. That pressure is not hers. When she lifts herself to the peephole, the hallway answers in the flat color of commercial paint, beige. Just a smear of institutional light and the edge of a stairwell shadow. For one soft second, she sees only the empty corridor and the white oval of her own face looking back through the glass, like a photograph you don't remember taking. The bulb goes dead in a staccato snap, and in that thin dark something hits the door with a force that makes the chain sing. It bangs so hard the chain rakes against the bolt, and the metal bites the wood. The sound is a blunt, wet knock that seems to carry the smell of rain and old paper into her chest. Air evacuates from the room as if someone has sucked the warmth out. Her knees ricochet. A second later, the lock clicks on its own accord. A small, deliberate click that sounds exactly like an answer. The click is a betrayal you can put your hand to. She slides her palm along the chain and finds a new gouge in the brass of the door frame, where a link has scored the paint. Fine white splinters cling to the metal like bone. The chain vibrates faintly under her fingertips, still humming from the strike, and the vibration leaves a tinnitus behind her left ear. Her skin prickles cold. That scrape is not something she can pretend away. The mark testifies that something hit the door with more than wind. The apartment around her has constricted. The lamp's filament blooms, then gutters. The kettle whistles and then sighs into a wet huff, and the strip of hallway light resumes its uneven breath. She realizes, with a small animal panic, that the deadbolt she thought she turned last night could have been undone by whatever just spoke in metal. Options shrink. The note on the peephole does not change, and a new fact sits on the tongue of the room. The door was touched from the other side. Her hands shake when she lets the peephole fall back. The glass leaves a crescent on her cheek where it warmed the skin. She presses her forehead to the door, and the wood is cool against her pulse, like a second skin that separates her from the corridor. The draft under the door has flattened and sharpened, no longer a breath, but a finger of ice climbing the toe of her slipper. She thinks through a dozen small, loud plans. Call the neighbor, slide a chair under the knob, run to the stairwell, and each one scrapes against the new reality. The lock clicked, the chain is scored. Someone or something has learned how to sound inside a room. Movement becomes risk. Sound becomes danger. She hears the tick of the clock as a measured footfall. Steady and inevitable time coalesces into a single hinge. The second hand trembles and finally rests. 222. The syllables of the numbers seem to harden in the air. She feels the apartment exhale with her, as if it had been holding its breath. And with that exhale comes the knowledge that waiting is no longer passive. Something has chosen to count down with her. The sticky note on the peephole scrapes when she rubs it, and under her fingertips she notices, impossibly, a faint impression in the paper, like the press of a second handwriting. She can't tell yet if the pressed letters are hers or another's, but the small ridge is real and forever. The warning was left, and now something has arrived to test whether it will be obeyed. She sets the phone on the narrow table by the door, thumbs moving with a nervous, precise rhythm until the little red dot blinks, and the corridor becomes a wavering rectangle of grain and light. The coffee on the counter goes stone cold, while the hallway bulb above the peephole continues its halting stutter. Every flicker throws a thin band of yellow across the floor that crawls like a living thing. On the screen, the plaster looks empty. The paint a wash of gray. She rewatches the footage with her face very close to the glass, breath fogging the pixels, tasting the faint, metallic aftertaste that has begun to line the back of her throat. For most of the clip, there is nothing, no movement, only the soft electrical hum and the irregular tick of the clock. And the nothing makes her mouth dry in a way she cannot name. When the knocks begin again, she doesn't look up. She watches through the recorded viewfinder, as if the rectangle will give her distance, as if distance can be proof. Silence lives in the frame until a single half-second before the first recorded rap. Then the light in the reflection behind her blooms colder, and a pale profile exists where nothing should be. For a fraction of a beat, the camera fills with the back of her own head and the damp shadow of her shoulder. And then, impossibly, behind that, a face. It is thin, as if lit from inside, and it is her face looking out from the wrong side of the glass. The mouth moves. Not a shout, not a scream. A small, private smile. Her stomach drops, and the phone feels slick in her fingers, warm as if someone else has just released it. She speaks into the lens with a voice as quiet as the scrape of fabric. Tell me the hour and the place, write it in the comments, and stay with me here. And please ask her like this. Press like, subscribe. The words taste like a dare the smile on the screen is the precise cruelty of something that knows the cadence of her life. It curves with the memory of a private joke. It understands the particular way she folds the corners of her mouth when she pretends not to be afraid. She rewinds frame by frame until the feed judders, pixelating into blocks. And then the recording stutters and replaces 30 seconds with a smear of static. When the picture resolves, her hand, a hand not hers, reaches across the frame and steadies the phone. The contact is instant, the warmth now real and external, and her pulse answers like a bell. Her fingers twitch, and the phone flashes. A new clip appears at the end of the file that she did not take, a 5-second shot from somewhere behind the door, grainy and sideways, showing her own kitchen sink and the dull curve of the kettle, the water in it blurred, as if the camera had been moving fast. And then a frame that catches a shoulder from behind her shoulder, tilted toward the hall where she is sitting, watching herself watch herself. She drops the mug porcelain rings and shatters into bright, hot shards across the tile. The burn of spilled coffee blooms on her wrist and does not register as pain yet, only as a hot punctuation that proves the video was not a trick of light. She leans back until the apartment's plaster settles against the cold of her spine. The corridor beyond the peephole remains a strip of uneven light, and sleeping paint, the sound of the radiator, clicks into a new rhythm, like distant teeth. The phone buzzes, a vibration that is not the app, but the device itself, as if someone on the other end is testing the seams, and an incoming file appears without a sender. Her thumb hovers and then opens it. The file is a single horizontal image, the peephole's view, but focused in the wrong plane, showing her face pressed to the glass, eyes hollow, and above it, stuck to the peephole from the hallway side, a yellow sticky note handwritten in a hurried hand that reads, "Never answer the door at 222. In the photograph, the note is older, its adhesive frayed, and the clock in the top corner of the image reads exactly 221. The air in the room becomes colder. A thin line of chill crawling along her calves up under the hem of her pajama pants, and she suddenly knows, with a clarity that is more animal than thought, that the hour is moving towards something that will not be altered by blinking. She tries to delete the files, and the phone will not allow it. Every attempt freezes the screen until the image of her smiling on the other side becomes a smear of light, then returns, then waits, like bait. The kettle on the stove ticks louder than before. Its steam hisses and twists into the ceiling light, and the sound of it is a precise, domestic metronome counting down. She cannot tell whether the reflection is a record of a past that will become present, or a preview of a future that wants to be inevitable. Either way, choice narrows to a single movement: leave the phone recording and stay awake, or shut off the device and pretend the corridor is empty. The decision makes her hands shake. She sets the phone back to record, not trusting the meter of the clock, but trusting the small, stubborn law that if you look, you can sometimes see what wants to happen. As the red dot blinks again, the bulb above the peephole stutters once more, the light folding into a thin, hard line, and she feels the first, inexorable tug of being watched from the exact place she thought would protect her. He told it like a confession, the neighbor leaning into the doorway as if the walls had ears and he wanted to spare them. His breath came in quick, metallic little gasps. The stairwell behind him smelled of damp paint and old cleaning soap, and a streak of scrawled graphite ran across the concrete. Do not answer. The words were gouged, not written, as if someone had dragged a thumb through wet plaster, and the letters scabbed into the paint. She could feel the stairwell's chill crawl under her threshold, each draft a thin, patient finger testing the seal. Hearing that rule changed the architecture of the apartment. What had been a place to sleep and store groceries now mapped into zones of danger. She did not sleep that night. She did not forget the way his voice slid off the consonants when he said the hour she pulled the chain from the little brass mount and felt its teeth bite her palm. The metal was colder than it should have been, as if it had been waiting in a cellar. Across the hall, she propped a bathroom mirror with old receipts and packing tape, the glass catching the bulb's stutter in a nervous, half-open eye. The hallway light trembled overhead. It kept skipping like a record trying to start a song, and the draft grew colder, thickening at ankle level into a pressure that felt like breath trying to push its way through the jam. She fastened the chain with a hard, decisive twist. There was no going back from the act of bolting oneself in. The apartment's air tightened. Her watch ticked louder, and she could not unknow the way the chain's little screws seemed suddenly fragile, like pins holding a seam minutes slimmed into a slow, grinding hour. She paced once, twice, then stopped to listen to the clock, because silence had teeth and she wanted to count them. The mirror across the hall offered a tidy, merciless copy of the corridor. Scuffed baseboards, the smear of oily light on the floor, the brass peephole glinting like an unblinking eye. In that reflected slice, she began to see lag, a small, wrong rhythm. Her own movement hesitated in the glass, a breath after she moved, lips forming a syllable she had not yet thought. A smile planted itself on the face in the mirror before her own mouth moved. It was a private, slow smile. The kind of smile meant for someone who knows you very intimately. The room temperature dropped with the realization, an internal cooling that made the back of her neck prickle. The coffee she had left at the table tasted suddenly like tin. She touched the chain. The metal thudded against her palm with a sound that gathered in the bones. That mismatch in the reflection altered something. Agency was not wholly hers anymore. The clock shivered toward its cruel minute at 222, soft as wet paper folding. A voice came through the wood, not a shout, but the precise cadence of her own childhood, the syllables she had not heard in years, because they belonged to a time when doors were opened for scraped knees and bedtime stories. Maggie, it said, in the lull and draw of her old inflection. The peephole exhaled a small, humid plume of scent, wet paint, and the faint, clean stinging of laundry soap. she saw the press before she processed it. Something leaned flat to the glass, a face cupped to the peephole, and for a strike of breath, she recognized herself in the other side, the same set of freckles, the same downturned right eyebrow. But the smile was an exact mirror of kindness performed wrong. The sound of the chain was suddenly not a comfort, but a test. Thin metal began to complain. A high, metallic whispering. There was a shove, hard enough to make the chain slot groan. And the screws near the plate, seeing the mirror across the hall, answered with a spiderweb crack racing outward from the center. And a shard pinged small and bright onto the linoleum. Her keys, jangling, careless, slipped from its hook and skittered under the radiator with a cold scrape. She felt the chain take weight in her palm, felt the cold as if something on the other side of the door had found the room's temperature and was trying to pull it through. The face at the peephole smiled wider, and where the light had been stuttering before, the bulb steadied into a single, brutal clarity that showed every fault line in the wood. The screws held for now, but whatever pressure had begun could not be unwound. The rule in the stairwell had not been a suggestion. The chain gives with a dry, metallic sob, and the door shudders inward, revealing a corridor that smells of wet paint and lemon soap. She freezes, calves prickling with the hallway draft that slides over her ankles like a curious tongue. Under the bulb, the light lies steady now, a proper white that washes the peeling wallpaper clean. And from that steady strip of brightness, she watches herself step back into the hall, eyes bleary, hair pressed flat against a temple. A small practiced motion, as if remembering how to tie a coat. There is no hesitation in that other body. It blinks as if waking, and the motion is wrong because it is used, rehearsed. For a heartbeat, she thinks the neighbor's whisper, "Do not answer," was not a warning, but an instruction to avoid this exact shape of exchange. Her lungs' miscount breath feels like cotton, muffled, as if someone pressed gauze at the back of her throat. The duplicate moves with a mechanical calm, fingers ghosting along the frame, checking for the chain that used to be taut. The chain hangs snapped, a cold bite of metal dangling at her fingertips, where resistance used to be. The apartment odor, coffee gone cold, the wet tang of detergent thins, and is replaced by a bright, clinical soap, the kind that rinses skin raw. Her kettle on the stove hisses into a small, indignant cough, and then collapses into silence. Steam folds itself inward until there is only a slow, stubborn warmth on the spout. Time slides, and the clock on the far wall quits its slow, truthful marching, hand locked forever at 222. The clock's face wears a bruise at 222 tonight. She takes a step toward the corridor and finds floor like glass under her soles. Too slick to trust, sound bounces oddly, as if there is a thin pane between her and the world. The woman in the hall does not meet her eyes. Instead, she reaches for the little yellow note stuck to the peephole and peels it back with an almost tender thumb. Where frantic script once warned, Neat block letters now stare back. Thank you. The neatness feels surgical. Once the paper lifts, the light on the other side seems to inhale and sharpen, resolving edges into clean, impossible angles, and the air tastes faintly of metal in the back of her mouth. She reaches for the chain out of habit, and fingers meet nothing but rough air. The tiny shudder of hope drains from her shoulders' motion, unravels like thread. The duplicate steps across the threshold, as if it owns the habit of entering here. Her coat folds into practiced creases, pockets lined with other people's minutes. There is a wrongness in the way the other lifts her hands to tuck a stray hair behind an ear, too slow, too purposeful. And when she moves toward the kettle, she carries the room with her. The hallway light steadies to a steady noon. The paint sheen resumes its glossy lie, and the draft clamps at the doorframe like a held breath. The woman at the stove watches with a feral clarity and realizes she has become the thing that opened the door. She feels the apartment like an envelope being slid shut inside. Her heartbeat thins to a single, small drum, and something unwinds in her mouth, leaving an absence of sound. Her hands search a pocket and find a key that is not hers. It is warm, as if it just left another palm. The kitchen light hums low, a distant refrigerator thrumming like a heart somewhere distant outside. Her reflection blinks a last polite blink and turns away, shoulders rolling into the corridor's domestic light. The stairwell yawns, accepting its new tenant with the indifferent scrape of shoes against concrete. She sees, in the reverse of her own face, the faint steam rising from the kettle, a clean, empty kettle steaming into the cold light of the hallway. That image, ridiculous and precise, is the final arithmetic. A thing paid and the account closed. The sticky note tucks itself back into place. The ink seems dry as bone. Down the stairwell, a soft, human shuffle grows small, and then is only rumor, as if life beyond her threshold has already been bundled and taken away. She cannot close the door she opened. Tell me the hour, and place you dread in the comments. And please subscribe to Whispera.